The air raid sirens' wail split the night, sending Kathleen Grant running for the shelter in her dressing gown and slippers. The February wind cut through the thin fabric as she clutched her identification papers to her chest. Around her, neighbors streamed from their homes into the blackness of wartime London, their faces pale ghosts in the searchlights crisscrossing the sky. "Hurry up," then he called Mrs. Pembroke, holding the Anderson shelter door as Kathleen ducked inside. The corrugated metal space was already crowded with familiar faces from Lavender Hill. They nodded grimly as she squeezed onto the wooden bench between the butcher's wife and old Mr. Simmons. The first bombs fell in the distance, making the shelter shudder. "Bad one tonight," someone murmured. Kathleen closed her eyes, trying to shut out the sounds. 23 years old, and she'd already decided love was a luxury of peacetime. War had taken too much, her father at Dunkirk, her brother somewhere in North Africa if he was still alive at all. Attachment only meant more loss, and she'd had her fill of telegrams bearing condolences from His Majesty's government. "Are you well, Miss Grant?" Mrs. Pembroke asked, noting her pallor. "Just tired," Kathleen replied, smoothing her auburn hair which had escaped its pins. The hospital was busy today. As a nurse at St. Thomas, she'd seen enough young men broken by war to know that hope was dangerous. Better to focus on what could be controlled, bandages changed, temperatures taken, wounds cleaned. Everything else, especially romance, was a distraction she couldn't afford. The bombs fell closer, rattling the tin walls. Kathleen clutched her Street Christopher medal, a gift from her mother, and waited for dawn. 3 days later, an ambulance screamed to a halt outside the hospital entrance. Kathleen was already moving as stretchers bearing wounded Allied soldiers were rushed through the corridors. 6 more from the evac transport, called Sister Matthews, her voice tight with exhaustion. 3 walking wounded, 3 critical. And 2 POWs coming behind them. Kathleen's hands moved automatically, checking pulses, assessing wounds. The casualties blurred together until she reached a stretcher near the end of the row. "American," the orderly said, moving on. The man's uniform was caked with mud and blood, his face ashen beneath days of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her, blue as the summer sky, watching her with startling clarity despite his injuries. "Hello, Angel," he whispered. Kathleen checked his chart. "Private First Class Patterson Irving, you have a shrapnel wound in your side and a broken femur. You'll need surgery." "Worth it," he murmured, "to meet you." She ignored the comment, focusing on his vital signs. Americans were always like this, too familiar, too confident. "You're the prettiest thing I've seen since landing in England," he continued, his accent distinctly Midwestern. "What's your name?" "Nurse Grant," she replied crisply, preparing a morphine injection. "And you should save your strength, Private." His hand caught hers weakly. "Kathleen," he read from her name pin. "I'm Pat." The morphine took effect quickly, his eyes growing heavy. Just before he drifted off, he whispered, "I'll write to you, Kathleen Grant, when this is all over." She tucked the blanket around him, dismissing the promise as morphine-induced sentimentality. Soldiers said many things they didn't mean when afraid and in pain. Believing them only led to heartbreak. "You're needed in Theatre 3, Nurse Grant," called Sister Matthews. "They're bringing in the POWs." Kathleen moved away from Pat Irving's bed, steeling herself for what came next. The 2 German prisoners were brought in under guard, one barely conscious, the other watching with wary eyes as British nurses approached. "This one's internal bleeding," the doctor said, pointing to the more severely wounded man. "We operate immediately." Working alongside the surgeon, Kathleen felt the familiar detachment settle over her. Enemy or ally, wounded men were just bodies to be repaired. The younger German watched her bandage his comrade's wound, suspicion in his eyes. "We're trying to save his life," she said in the few German phrases she'd learned. "Do you understand?" He nodded slightly, confusion crossing his face. They were trained to expect mistreatment, not care. Kathleen understood his disorientation. War made enemies of strangers, turning human beings into abstractions. It was easier that way, until you saw the fear in their eyes. Pat Irving recovered slowly. Each day on her rounds, Kathleen found him watching for her, his smile brightening when she appeared. Despite her professional distance, she found herself lingering at his bedside. "Nebraska," he told her one afternoon, answering her question about home. "My family has a farm outside Lincoln. Wheat mostly, some cattle." "It sounds peaceful," she said, checking his dressings. "It is. Nothing but sky for miles." His eyes held hers. "You'd like it there." Kathleen focused on her work, ignoring the flutter in her chest. "I've never been farther than Brighton. When this is over, you should see America. I'd show you the prairie in spring, when the wildflowers come up. The war isn't over yet, Private Irving." "Pat," he corrected. "And it will be, someday." She changed the subject. "Your unit is preparing for something big. There are rumors." His expression sobered. "Can't talk about it. But I'll be shipping out once I'm cleared. June, probably." Kathleen knew better than to ask more. Every day brought whispers of invasion plans, training exercises along the coast. Something was building, and Pat would be part of it. "Will you write to me?" he asked suddenly. "Just so I know someone's thinking of me." Against her better judgment, she nodded. "I suppose I could." His smile was like sunrise. From beneath his pillow, he produced a small notebook. "My address is in here. And some letters I've been writing to you." "You've been writing to me?" "But we barely know each other." "I'm making up for lost time," he said. "Read them after I've gone. Please?" She took the notebook, slipping it into her pocket. "I should finish my rounds." "Kathleen," he called as she turned away. "What do you think about June weddings?" She looked back, exasperated. Honestly, Americans. But for the first time in years, she found herself smiling as she walked away. The night before Pat was discharged, Kathleen found him sitting up in bed writing by flashlight. "Another letter?" she asked. He closed the notebook. "The most important one. For after." She sat beside him, aware of the other patient sleeping nearby. "Pat, I think we should be realistic." "About what?" "This." She gestured between them. "Whatever this is. You're going into combat, and I'm staying here." The odds don't matter," he interrupted. "Not with the right person. We've known each other 3 weeks." He took her hand. "Sometimes you just know." "That's not enough," she insisted. "Not in wartime." "It's exactly because of the war that it matters," Pat said quietly. "Every moment counts now. I've seen men die waiting for someday. I don't want to be one of them." Kathleen felt tears threaten. "I've lost too many people to believe in happy endings." "Then believe in me instead." He pressed something into her palm. "Keep this safe until I come back." It was his dog tag, a serious breach of regulations. "Pat, you can't, I have the other one. This way, part of me stays with you." His eyes were earnest. "I love you, Kathleen Grant." I know it's fast and maybe crazy, but it's true. She should have returned the tag, maintained her professional distance. Instead, she slipped it into her pocket next to his notebook. Be careful out there, she whispered. I will. He leaned forward, their foreheads touching. And when I come back, I'm going to ask you a proper question. In the shadowed ward, with bombs falling somewhere in the distance, Kathleen let herself believe, just for a moment, in the possibility of after. On June 6, the invasion of Normandy began. Kathleen worked through her shift mechanically, thinking of Pat somewhere on those beaches. His letters had become her lifeline, funny, thoughtful notes describing training in southern England, the American camp, his friends. Never military details, just glimpses of his life and dreams for the future. Their future, he always emphasized. She wrote back, cautiously at first, then with increasing openness. She told him about growing up in Clapham, her work at the hospital, the small joys that persisted despite rationing and blackouts. With each letter, her conviction that love was impossible during war weakened a little more. The casualties from France began arriving. Kathleen searched every face, dreading and hoping to find Pat among them. Instead, his letters stopped coming. July passed without word. Then August. He's probably moving with the advance, her friend Sarah suggested. Mail is unreliable from the front. Kathleen nodded, but the hollow feeling in her chest grew. She wore his dog tag beneath her uniform, touching it for reassurance during the worst moments. In September, a letter arrived from Pat's commanding officer. Private First Class Patterson Irving was missing in action, presumed dead after heavy fighting near St. Lo. His personal effects would be sent to his family. Kathleen read the letter in the nurse's changing room, her world collapsing around the carefully typed words. That night, she reread every letter he'd written, searching for some hint she'd missed, some promise unfulfilled. The final letter in his notebook, the one he'd written the night before leaving, remained sealed. On the envelope he'd written, "For Kathleen Grant, open only when the war is over." She couldn't bring herself to break the seal. As long as his last words remained unread, something of him stayed alive. The war ended in Europe on May 8, 1945. Kathleen joined the celebrations in Trafalgar Square, watching strangers embrace and dance. She felt hollow amid the joy, her hand constantly reaching for the dog tag she still wore. 2 weeks later, she received a package from Nebraska, Pat's belongings, forwarded by his mother with a kind note expressing gratitude for bringing comfort to her son during his recovery. Among the items was a small velvet box containing an engagement ring with a note, "For when I ask that proper question." Kathleen finally opened Pat's last letter that night, her hands trembling. "My dearest Kathleen, if you're reading this, the war is finally over. I pray I'm beside you as you read these words, but if I'm not, know that loving you gave me peace in the midst of chaos. You once told me you couldn't believe in happy endings during war. I hope now you can believe in happy beginnings during peace. Whatever happens to me, promise you'll live fully. Find joy. Maybe even Nebraska someday. All my love." Patchy wrote to his family the next day, accepting their invitation to visit when travel became possible again. Life resumed its rhythm. Kathleen remained at St. Thomas, eventually becoming Sister Grant, respected for her steady hands and compassionate care. She never married, though there were opportunities. Whenever asked why, she would simply touch the ring she wore on a chain alongside Pat's dog tag. "I made my choice," she would say. "And I've never regretted it." Decades passed. Kathleen retired to a small cottage in Sussex, her hair now white, her hands gnarled with arthritis but still capable of tending her garden. She kept Pat's letters in a rosewood box beside her bed, occasionally rereading them on the anniversary of their meeting. In 1992, the postman brought an unusual delivery, a packet of letters, worn and yellowed, with American military markings. The accompanying note explained they had been discovered during renovation of an old postal depot in France, part of a mail bag lost during the chaos of 1944. With trembling fingers, Kathleen opened the first envelope. The handwriting, so familiar even after 48 years, blurred through her tears. July 12, 1944. My darling Kathleen, I'm writing by flashlight in a foxhole somewhere in France. The fighting has been brutal, but I'm safer now. Every night before sleep, I think of your face, and it gives me courage. There were 7 letters in all, written between June and August 1944. The final one was dated August 15, 3 days before Pat was reported missing. Dearest Kathleen, we're moving again tomorrow, pushing eastward. The rumors say Paris may be liberated soon. I carry your picture and letters with me always. Strange news, yesterday I treated a wounded German soldier, no older than me. As I bandaged his arm, I remembered how you cared for enemy wounded, seeing the person beyond the uniform. You've changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I had a dream last night of our farm in Nebraska. You were there, hanging laundry while children played nearby. Our children, Kathleen. Hold that dream for me until I return. It won't be long now. Forever yours. Pat. Kathleen sat motionless, feeling the years collapse between now and then. These words, written by a young man full of hope, had traveled across time to find her when she was an old woman of 92. The telephone rang, startling her from her reverie. It was her grandniece, calling to confirm Sunday lunch. Are you all right, Aunt Kath? You sound strange. I'm fine, dear, Kathleen replied, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I've just received some wonderful news from an old friend. After hanging up, she returned to the letters. Something fell from between the pages of the last one, a pressed wildflower, delicate and faded but still intact. A prairie flower from Nebraska that Pat must have carried with him across the ocean. Kathleen carefully placed it in her Bible, next to the telegram she'd received in 1955, the one informing her that Pat's remains had finally been identified in a military cemetery near Caen. She had visited once, placing cornflowers on his grave because he'd written that they reminded him of her eyes. Outside her window, the garden bloomed in the summer sun. Kathleen made her way slowly to her favorite chair, Pat's letters cradled in her lap. For decades, she had lived the life he wished for her, full of purpose and even joy, though tinged with loss. She had kept her promise. I'm glad these found me, she whispered to the empty room, imagining him listening. Even now. In the warmth of the afternoon, she closed her eyes, feeling strangely complete. The letters had been delivered, the circle closed. Somewhere beyond understanding, she felt certain Pat knew. And for the first time in 48 years, Kathleen believed entirely in happy endings.